It's not very often that I get invited to speak in a church, or in this case a former church. It's usually without invitation, and as has been mentioned, most famously in Canterbury Cathedral in 1998, when myself and 6 other members of Outrage interrupted the Easter sermon of the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, over his opposition to gay equality and his public advocacy that the law should discriminate. And yes, I'm very honoured to be a fellow convictee with Jim under the 1860 Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act, formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1552, which makes any dissent in a church, no matter how peaceful and brief, a criminal offence. And unlike Jim, I got the astonishing fine, the comical fine of £18.60. I think it could have been £5,000 and 6 months in prison, but quite clearly the judge thought that this particular prosecution was rather frivolous. Anyway, I digress. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming and sharing our concern about the fate of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and indeed Bradley Manning and all those others who have taken a stand for peace and justice. And a special tribute to Ben for the stand that he's taken. It's not easy. He's been quite courageous, a very articulate, powerful spokesperson to shine a light on what British and American forces have been doing. And full tribute to you, Ben. I can also digress for a moment. The first song you sang was very poignant because my grandfather, a farm boy in northeastern Victoria, was conscripted in 1916 in Australia and packed off with, I think, about 2 weeks basic training on a troop ship which got torpedoed in the Channel. Fortunately, no lives were lost, but then he was dumped without any proper training straight into the front line in Flanders. And the first time over the top was shot through both legs, and amazingly and very luckily survived. But of course, tens of thousands of others didn't, and the hundreds of thousands of others didn't. So yeah, that was a very poignant moment in that song. Thank you. The whole saga about WikiLeaks is, of course, really a titanic battle over public accountability of the military and government. That's what this all boils down to. Our right to know and our right to have accountability by the military and the government over what they do in our name. And I think that WikiLeaks' exposure of so many war crimes and crimes against humanity has been a great public service. A great service to the people of the United States, this country, and the world, to shine a light on what has been hidden from us, on what we've not been told, on what, of course, we should have been told, but which was kept from us. And I think everybody involved, allegedly Bradley Manning, allegedly Julian Assange, allegedly his co-workers at WikiLeaks, those people have blown the whistle on terrible, terrible crimes. And for that, we ought to be incredibly grateful and salute them. At the bottom line, the issue is transparency and accountability. That in democracies, governments and armed forces ought to operate in a transparent way where the people they serve, and let's not forget, governments and military are the servants of the people, or supposed to be, where we the people know what they are doing, why they are doing it, the consequences of what they're doing. And that when mistakes are made, when crimes are committed, that there is full accountability. That's a fundamental democratic principle. I think that the WikiLeaks revelations have exposed things that we didn't know about. Terrible things that were done by the armed forces of the United States, Britain and other countries that we were not told about. It also exposed the hypocrisy of governments. That so often governments would say one thing in public and something different in private. And, you know, again, this duplicity, this double standard, this contradiction between what servants of the public are saying to the world and what they're doing and authorizing and saying in private, that needs to be exposed. Now, I'm mindful that there are, of course, some critics who say that WikiLeaks revelations were too indiscriminate, that too much information was given out, that, you know, some of the information was sensitive and may have even put some innocent people's lives at risk. And to some extent, I share the view that if I was doing this, there's some information I probably wouldn't have released. But overall, as far as we know, despite the hypothetical possibility, as far as we know, no one has been harmed by these leaks. The informants, including some human rights defenders and others who are named in some of these cables, have not suffered as a consequence, although their argument has been used to try and undermine WikiLeaks and to criticize Assange. So we need to be very clear. The harm allegedly that might have been caused has not materialized. I think we also need to be very mindful that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange will almost certainly eventually face prosecution on very, very serious charges. Right now, they just can't get sufficient information to make a watertight case, thanks to people like Bradley Manning refusing to cooperate and refusing to name names, and of course other people as well. Let's not forget that some of Bradley Manning's friends have been interrogated as well. Some of his friends have been subjected to harsh, threatening interrogations, and thankfully, and with great courage, they have refused to capitulate. But those people are under great pressure. And I think it's very important that we realize that this long, drawn-out process affecting Julian Assange and Bradley Manning, it may go on for quite some time yet, because quite clearly the powers that be in the United States are determined to get these two men. Absolutely determined, and to put on them harsh, severe, and very damaging charges. So, just as they have stood the test of time and walked the walk this long time, we need to stand with them, to show them solidarity, that they are not alone. And if any of you haven't already, please send a letter or postcard to Bradley Manning in Fort Leavenworth. If you go to my website, petertatchell.net, scroll down the front page, you'll eventually come to an article about Bradley Manning, and down the bottom it lists several things you can do. Write to your MP and MEP, write to the President Barack Obama, and of course, most importantly, write to Bradley Manning to show your support. Those letters are so, so important. Every political prisoner I've ever worked with says, without any hesitation and with great passion, the letters they receive are an incredible morale boost. They really do help sustain people who are going through great hardship and suffering. So if you haven't written to Bradley, please do so, and get your friends to do so. Already there are hundreds, even thousands of letters being received by Bradley, but we need more. We need hundreds of thousands of letters to send a signal to him and to his military captors and to the US government that Bradley is not alone, that we will not desert him. As I said, the release of information is a public service. It's, if you like, an unofficial version of freedom of information. You can bet if we'd tried to get a freedom of information request on this information, on what happened in these various incidents, well, first of all, we couldn't, because we didn't even know they existed. But even if we did, they'd come back redacted with all the information blanked out. I mean, I had a funny incident a couple of years ago when I was trying to ascertain on what authority the Catholic Church was digging up the bones of Cardinal Newman in a bid to separate him from his lifelong partner, Father Ambrose St. John. Now that, of course, Cardinal Newman's on the road to sainthood, it was rather embarrassing for the Catholic Church for him to be buried in the same grave with the man who shared his life. So they secured an authority to dig up the bones to rebury him elsewhere. So I filed a Freedom of Information request to find out on what legal authority there was to dig up this man's bones against his express wishes to be buried with the man he loved and lived with. And I got about 120 pages, and I can tell you, out of 120 pages, probably a total of 3 pages were unredacted. So it just shows how phony, despite the fact that freedom of information is a good thing, and it sometimes can be useful and sometimes can get results, how phony it often is. So Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have performed a freedom of information service by getting that information out to us. What is so strange is the outcry against Julian and WikiLeaks. You know, they're the bad guys. But what about the people who did these terrible things? Where is the hue and cry against the people who committed the war crimes, who authorized the cover-up? And we're talking about not just, rank and file military personnel. We're talking about senior officers who have been party to those decisions, to take those actions, and to cover up the consequences. We're talking about senior government officials who've been party to the cover-up and who've sought to deny the public's right to know. Those are the people who we should all be outraged about. Those are the ones that the press should be gunning for, not Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Don't shoot the messenger. Concentrate on bringing to justice those who committed terrible human rights abuses. That must be our message. Of course, the case with regard to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange is muddied by the sex allegations against him. And I don't think any of us are in a position to know the truth either way on that issue. We don't know the facts. We weren't there. It's unclear. We've got 2 different versions of what happened. But there's no doubt that these allegations of sexual abuse, even rape, are muddying the waters when it comes to defending Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. From the evidence that I've heard, I find the case against him very weak. In fact, I would suspect that nearly everybody has probably done similar things in similar circumstances. Or many people. I'm sure that many people have probably done similar things in similar circumstances. And under British law, certainly what he is alleged to have done would not be counted as rape. But of course, Sweden has some very draconian laws, quite rightly designed to protect women, or men, who are victims of sexual assault and rape, but open to misinterpretation, misapplication, and to potential abuse. I know that Julian is fighting extradition to Sweden. I understand why he's doing that. But I think that so long as these allegations hang over him, the clarity and force of his moral case against what the US military were doing and in defense of his release of information, that is bound to remain clouded. And my own view is that if I was in his position, I'm not, but if I was, personally I would go to Sweden and face those charges. I would go to that court, defend myself, and take a stand, and get the issue resolved, hopefully with an acquittal, so then all those allegations can be put to one side and people can focus very clearly on the big picture, the big issue, which is about the WikiLeaks revelations.